Yes, folks, Billy Te Kahika doesn't have one idea of his own. Much of what he says is stolen. Now, as for him getting into Parliament, well, that looks very remote indeed. He's definitely not going to get the 5%, so he's banking everything on winning Te Tai Tokerau, which doesn't look promising either, given his poor performance at the debate the other night, where he simply didn't cut through. Anyway, before getting into Billy's policy piracy, I'll start off with a bit of background.
Isn't that hilarious? They're trying to say that, hey guys, guess what? The media's part of it, so they're pushing this narrative. They're the only two parties. I was watching a guy on the media this morning from, I think he was from NZ Herald, a commentator around politics. And he kept on referring to there only being two political parties. And it was just absolutely bizarre. I'm like, come on, guys, this. I wonder if they actually know how complicit and dishonest they're coming over because, or actually no, there's not just two parties, actually a number of parties, and Advance New Zealand is one of them. We're not a minor party.
Yes, you are, Billy. You're 1%.
We're actually a very significant party. And so, the condescension and dishonesty in the media is just massive.
And he is saying that just after lying himself.
But what it's going to come down to, guys, and I've been looking at some of the feedback coming up, and I want to address some of it. So really, our policies are what is really going to get us moving forward. We've got policies around democracy and government accountability and transparency. We've got our agriculture policy, which is up. We've got our housing policy, which is going to be up today. I want one more line added into it. I was happy with it 100%, but I want one more little paragraph added into it. Then I'll be absolutely happy with it. But this is about actually developing the capacity at government level and at council level to open up the channels and removing the red tape so that land can be released and that houses can be built. So
people want to know, how do we reduce the cost of housing in New Zealand? How come it's so much cheaper in Australia than it is New Zealand? Well, one reason is because that's Australia. But apart from that, there are things we can definitely do here to reduce the cost of housing. One is open up the market to new products. The products coming into New Zealand, we're a small market. It's really expensive to get a new product on the market, which means that product becomes either exorbitantly expensive or simply does not get introduced. And if it doesn't get introduced, because of lack of competition, the prices go up. So one way to reduce pricing, more competition in the marketplace. Number two is actually the cost of land. Now, New Zealand has the most usable land per head of population, I think, of any country in the world, and we need to use it. But our land is very expensive because of regulation and because of people land banking. So changing regulations in the way that we develop, reducing the complexity of the RMA, don't do away with it, but actually make it transparent so everyone knows where they're going with it, and free up more land for development would reduce the cost of land. And the third thing is just building smaller houses, really. Instead of having to have such massive houses with 2 bathrooms and a walk-in ensuite, actually small, basic houses will reduce the cost and allow more people to get at an entry level. And the last thing is net zero immigration.
Net zero immigration.
If we haven't got enough houses for our people now, we can't really have a whole lot of more immigrants coming in.
Yes. Anyway, now to more Billy on this.
Programs about that. It's also about helping people be able to own them. We've got a great plan and a metrics that will get low-income families into their own homes that they can own, and also get the blinking houses built. Because right now there are solo mums right now, solo dads with children, living in tents, living in tree huts, living in cow sheds, horse floats right now, collecting water in buckets to live. And that's not good enough. So we actually need a really strong, robust, practical housing strategy. We've got an immigration policy that will protect New Zealand but treat people with compassion as well. But also protect our country. We want to take the current capacity from 75,000 people a year, folks. 75,000 people is what they're leading into our country, and we can't take care of our own. So we need to dramatically reduce that right down.
Yes. net zero immigration.
We've got an environmental policy as well, which is about protecting our biosphere, getting rid of 1080 poisons, and coming up with another revenue earning sector, i.e. possum trapping.
Hi, I'm Leighton Baker, the leader of New Conservative. Today I really want to talk about the environment and what we can do to help New Zealand's environment. So there's a few great things we believe that we should try in New Zealand. One is replacing 1080. So what that is actually giving set contracts, a 10-year contract, to different areas of the bush so the trappers and lurers can prove that they can do a better job than 1080 in those areas. The bonus from that is that we get to use the possum fur. You know, possum fur is meant to be 50% warmer than merino and 35% warmer than cashmere. We get to use the meat and pet food. We get whole industries around trapping. We get employment. You know, it's a win-win for us by replacing 1080 wherever we can.
Pest control, which there's good money to be earned out of that. We have a medical and health sovereignty policy. We have an economic plan. We've got a direct democracy plan around referenda.
What is binding referenda? Well, we talk about, binding referenda is if you have a referenda and the result is binding on the government. As a party, we've been calling for binding citizens-initiated referenda, or BCIR. Now, in the 1990s, the government introduced a law called the CIR, which was Citizens-Initiated Referenda. And what it said is if you had real concerns about something the government were doing or wanted something introduced, you had to get 10% of the people that were eligible to vote to sign your petition. So 10%, which it actually worked out. People had to get around 400,000 signatures. I know that's more than 10%, but sometimes there were double ups and all sorts of things like that. So to be safe, you really had to get around 400,000 signatures, which is a massive amount of signatures to get. And I think just about every referendum took more than the allocated time to get those signatures, just because it's such a big job. And even though, when it came to the vote, sometimes up to 90%, where there was 90% support for that referenda question, still took a long time to get the signatures. So got the signatures, the referenda would go through, we'd get to vote on it. People voted in overwhelming favour for quite a few, for all the referenda actually. For every referenda that's got through and got the signatures and gone to a public vote, all of them have been passed by over 2/3 of the people that voted them. Over 2/3. The problem is no government has ever honoured a citizens-initiated referenda. None. Since 1990, no government has actually said, oh, okay, people, we will do what you ask. They've all said, no, we're not going to. And that's not democracy. I'm sorry. Democracy is when you and I choose someone to represent us in Parliament, and their job is solely to represent us. They don't have to have any other skills. They don't have to have a degree or diploma. Don't have to have a trade. Don't even have to have level 1 NCEA credits. Nothing. They just have to go to Wellington to represent us. That's all they're asked to do. And yet they ignore us. Somehow when they get to Wellington, they think they know better than everyone that voted for them. Everyone else in New Zealand, they rule, they'll tell us what to do. And that's what got me involved in politics, actually. That's not right. That's not democracy. That's unhealthy. And when I see things that are coming out just recently by the government, it scares me a wee bit that the government have taken on themselves that they are there to rule over us and tell us what to do, not actually represent us. So binding citizens-initiated referenda would mean that once you have a referenda, then the citizens vote on it. If they supported it, then it would be binding on the government. No more the government ignoring you. And what that would do would give the people of New Zealand the opportunity to actually control the government in between elections. So at the moment, the only time you can control them or do anything with them is at election time. You can vote them out or vote them in. But between that, really, you have no control on the government. So our BCIR policy is all about giving us some form of control over the government in between elections.
We've got a sensible laws and sentencing policy.
Yeah, now, folks, this is Garth McVicker, who has been fighting crime for years.
Go. Okay. The journey that led me down to be part of the New Conservative movement is I got involved with setting up the Sensible Sentencing Trust and helped a lot of victims of crime. And when you're involved at the top end of the law and order, breakdown of law and order issues in this country, you look at what's created the high crime rate we have in New Zealand, and ultimately it leads you to the breakdown in family. And the traditional political parties aren't interested in fixing the root causes of the problem at all. Just more of the same seems to be the message from them. Well, I was brought up in a family that taught me we're meant to stand up for what we believe is wrong in society and try and leave the country better than we found it. So that led me to setting up Sensible Sentencing Trust, which got me involved in a lot of the high-profile crimes around New Zealand, which ultimately led to me to starting to lobby political. And there was only one political party that was interested at all in trying to solve the issues and look at the root causes, and that was obviously the New Conservative Party. So that's where why I got involved in that. And then you look at what this existing government is standing for, and you've got Andrew Little saying, well, we should, let more people out of prison. Prison's not the place for them. But it was a lot of their policies that actually created the problem, the breakdown in family values. Those are the issues that we're dealing with. So, the traditional political parties weren't going to be an answer for me. So it led me to standing for the New Conservative Party at the last election. And thoroughly enjoyed it, and I love their policies. I love what they're standing for. I'm a farmer, and they're very supportive of farming issues. But for me, it's about trying to leave New Zealand better than I found it. So getting involved in New Conservatives and hopefully giving them enough members in Parliament to be able to make a difference, just make a difference, give some backbone to their existing political parties, stand up for what we believe, which seems to be, a dirty word these days. Families, it seems to be foreign language, which I struggle with. I've got 4 daughters, I've got a lovely family, I'm a family man, and so the New Conservatives are it for me. So what led me here? Well, that's it in a nutshell, really. And I just encourage New Zealanders to think very seriously when you vote. Think about what you're going to vote for. Think about the country you want to leave behind you. Not so much about putting more money in your wallet. That's not what it's about. It's about leaving the country better than you found it, leaving a country that's better for your kids, and voting for what you believe in, and the country that, the political party that's got the policies that you believe in.
What's your take or your view on the justice policy with regards to the 3-stage sentencing that New Conservative is proposing?
I like it. It's putting the responsibility back where it belongs, and rather than the traditional justice system, if you like, seems to fudge all around the issues and whatnot. So I like, putting responsibility. It's accountability and responsibility for our actions, really, and that's what the Conservatives are saying, and I totally agree with that.
We will repeal the current firearms laws. Now, I announced that yesterday. It showed me taking a few shots at a pistol club and that was just to highlight the fact that really safe ownership of firearms is a matter of democracy in New Zealand as much as anything else. And the problem has never been with licensed firearms owners. And
I'm Victoria O'Brien, Firearms spokesperson and candidate for New Lynn for New Conservative. The changes to our firearms laws in this country that were introduced post March 15th last year were all done in an emotional climate of fear and uncertainty created by a heinous massacre. What that did was to affect the lives of hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders who had their legal property taken away from them. This is property that they worked hard for, that they saved for, stored legally, used lawfully, and then was prohibited overnight. Subsequent to the first set of changes, Orders in Council decided simply by an executive of the government were able to ban certain types of ammunition and more firearms after the first tranche. These are transgressions of fundamental rights, or rights that we would consider as fundamental for New Zealanders. As a result, New Conservative seeks to completely repeal those two pieces of legislation and restore the Arms Act to its original intent, which is to license fit and proper individuals to own and use firearms. Important pieces of legislation that affect hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders' livelihoods and way of life should be put through a set of referenda. As a result, New Conservative has binding citizens-initiated referenda as one of its key democracy platforms. This would give New Zealanders much greater say in how we live our lives. At present, the power of Parliament is completely unfettered. This will mean that 61 MPs in Parliament can decide anything they want. And we have no say at present. The power of Parliament is supreme. New Conservative will have legislative standards policies introduced, an act which will restrain the power of Parliament. This will enable all legislation, past and future, to be tested against the Magna Carta and the 1688 Bill of Rights, two fundamental platforms for our legislative framework already in place. This will also mean that government departments cannot simply enact policies and regulation without any consultation, which will also lead to smaller government. That's the firearms and democracy platforms for New Conservative.
Yes, folks, you can clearly see none of those policy ideas are Billy's. And it truly amazes me that he is actually trying to make them his own just 2 weeks prior to the election, which clearly shows desperation, because his main UN agenda platform is not resonating with mainstream people.